It's so lovely to have many of you who's made this a tradition with your families for many years. And so we all know the story so well. You can just think about it a moment and go home. We all know it. Some of you can probably recite the words with me as we go. So there's something about this. I was telling Nancy this evening that it's so curious to me that every year I think, well, will this be, maybe it's almost done, my experience with this play. And then we get into it again and you realize, my goodness, there's so much yet that it has to teach me and seems to have to say. And it continues to be a wonderful mystery and a challenging one, as we all know, which is probably why we're here. Otherwise, why would we come to a story we already know, right? There's something in this. So we know has anybody never heard the story before? Everyone has heard it. Well, you heard it a couple nights ago. Everyone's heard it before. Great. So you know the most famous character from the story, right? No? Who's the most famous character? Tiny Tim, right? Yeah, he's getting some increasing fame these days. Yeah, so but it doesn't start with that most famous character. Who does it start with?
Scrooge.
It doesn't start with Scrooge, but he is probably the most famous character. Marley. Why does it start with him? I'm going to get you to tell the story.
The new technique.
Because he's dead. It's important to know that he was dead because the story would be very strange if he weren't. It doesn't quite work as well. It's strange enough anyway, right? At least let him be dead. So let's start with that. Marley was dead, to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge knew he was dead. Of course he did. How could it be otherwise? He and Scrooge were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole friend, his sole mourner. He never painted out old Marley's name, however. There it yet stood above the warehouse door years afterwards. Scrooge and Marley. That was the name of their business. Sometimes people new to the business would call Scrooge Scrooge and sometimes Marley. He answered to both names. It was all the same to him. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone with Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. External heat and cold had little influence on him. No warmth could warm, no cold could chill him. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "How are you, my dear Scrooge? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life ever asked him the way to such and such a place. Not of Scrooge. But what did he care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once, upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on a Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting, foggy weather, and the city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open, that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, sat copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but that clerk's fire was so very much smaller that it looked like one coal. But he couldn't replenish it because Scrooge kept the coal box in his own room. Wherefore that clerk put on his white comforter and tried to warm himself at a candle, in which effort, not being a man of strong imagination, he failed. "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" This was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah! Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure. I do. Out upon Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older and not an hour richer. A time for balancing your books and having every item in them presented dead against you. If I had my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should, uncle, nephew. Keep Christmas in your own way, and let me keep it in mine. Keep it? But you don't keep it. Let me leave it alone, then. Much good it may do you, much good it has ever done you. Uncle, there are many things from which I have derived good, by which I have not profited. I dare say Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable time, the only time I know in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely, and to look at people below them as if they really were fellow travelers to the grave. And therefore, I say, God bless it. Oh. The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Clerk, let me hear another sound from you, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation. Nephew, you're quite a powerful speaker, so it's a wonder you don't go into Parliament. Don't be angry, Uncle. Come see us. Dine with us tomorrow. Oh, Scrooge said that he would see him. Indeed, he did. He went the whole length of that expression and said that he would see him in hell first. But why? Why? Why did you get married? Because I fell in love. Because you fell in love. Good afternoon. Nay, Uncle, you never came to see me before that happened. Why give it as a reason for not coming now? Good afternoon. I want nothing from you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon. I have made the trial in homage to Christmas, and I will keep my Christmas cheer to the last. So, a Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a Happy New Year. Good afternoon. As the clerk let Scrooge's nephew out, he let a portly gentleman in. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Marley died 7 years ago, this very night. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is desirable that we make some slight provision for the many thousands poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Are there no prisons? Plenty of prisons, but under the impression that they scarcely furnish cheer of mind and body to the unoffending multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall we put you down for? Nothing. You wish to be anonymous. I wish to be left alone. Since you ask me what I wish, sir, that is my answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the prisons and the workhouses. Those who are badly off must go there. Many can't go there. Many would rather die. If they would rather die, then they had better do it. And decrease the surplus population. Good evening, sir. Well, the hour of shutting up that counting house had arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge tacitly admitted the fact to the expectant clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed his candle out and put on his hat. You want all day tomorrow, I suppose? If quite convenient, sir. It is not convenient. If I was to dock half a crown for it, you'd think yourself mightily ill-used, would you not? Yes, sir. Yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. It's only once a year, sir. A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. Be here all the earlier next morning. The clerk promised that he would, and with the long ends of that white comforter dangling below his waist, for he boasted no greatcoat, he ran home as hard as he could pelt. As for Scrooge, he took his melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern and went home to bed. Before we go to his house, would you like to have a seat over here? Yeah, come on. There's a chair over here. Yeah, two. Not two.
Very kind of you, sir.
No worries. So he went home to bed. The only inhabitant in an old, dreary house. Scrooge lived in a gloomy suite of rooms, which once belonged to his deceased partner, Marley. Now, it is a fact that there is nothing at all particular or fancy about the knocker on the door of this London house, except that it was very large, and that Scrooge had seen it night and morning during his whole residence in that place. And yet, Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw not the knocker, but Marley's face. Marley's face, with a dismal light about it, like a bad lobster in a dark cellar. It was not angry or ferocious, but it looked at Scrooge the way Marley used to look, with its ghostly spectacles turned up upon his ghostly forehead. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it became a knocker again. Bah! And he closed the door with a bang. The sound resounded through the house like thunder, echoing on through the halls and into the stacks of china. Scrooge was not a man to be frightened by echoes. He fastened the door, walked across the hall and up the stairs, slowly too, trimming his candle as he went. Up Scrooge went, not carrying a button, for it being very dark. Darkness is cheap, and Scrooge liked it. But before he shut his heavy door, he looked about his rooms to see that all was right. Sitting room, bedroom, lumber room, all as they should be. Nobody under the table. Nobody under the sofa. A small fire was in the grate, and a spoon and basin were ready, and a little saucepan of gruel. Scrooge had a cold in his head, was on the hob. Nobody under the bed. Nobody in the closet. Yeah. Nobody in his dressing gown, which was hanging up in a suspicious attitude against the wall. Quite satisfied, he closed the door and double-locked himself in, which was not his custom. Thus, secured against surprise, he took off his cravat, put on his dressing gown and slippers and nightcap, and he sat down before a very low fire to take his gruel. A clanking noise deep down below, as if some person were dragging a heavy chain. Then the noise got much louder, coming up the stairs, then coming straight towards his door. A spectre passed into his room before his eyes, and upon its coming in, the dying flame of the fire leapt up as though it cried, "I know him, Marley's ghost." The same face. The very same. Marley, in his pigtail, usual waistcoat, tights, and boots. But his body was transparent, so that Scrooge, looking through the waistcoat, could see the 2 buttons on the coat behind. He'd often heard it said that Marley had no bowels, but he never believed it until now. Though he looked that phantom through and saw it standing before him, though he felt the chilling influence of its death-cold eyes, and noticed the very texture of the folded kerchief bound about his head and chin, he was still incredulous. "What do you want with me?" "Much," Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" "In life I was your partner, Jacob Marley." Can you sit down?" "I can." "Do it then." Well, Scrooge asked this strange question because he didn't know whether a ghost so transparent might find himself in a condition to take a chair. But that spirit sat down on the opposite side of the fireplace as if he were quite used to it. "You don't believe in me, do you?" "I don't." "What evidence would you need of my reality beyond that of your own senses?" "I don't know." "Why do you doubt your senses?" "Because a little thing affects them. A slight disorder of the stomach makes them cheat. You might be an undigested bit of beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more gravy than grave about you, whatever you are." Yeah! But how much greater was his horror when that phantom, taking off the bandage round its head as if it were too warm to wear indoors, its lower jaw dropped down upon its breast. "Mercy! Dreadful apparition! Why do you trouble me? Why do spirits haunt the earth, and why do they come to me?" "It is required of every man that the spirit within him should walk abroad among his fellow men. And if that spirit goes not forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. I cannot rest, I cannot stay, I cannot linger anywhere. Mark me. In life my spirit never roved beyond the narrow confines of our money-changing hole. Weary journeys lie before me." 7 years dead and traveling all the time? You travel fast? "On the wings of the wind." You might have got over a great quantity of ground in 7 years. Blind man. Oh, blind man. No space of regret can make amends for one life's opportunities misused. Yet I was once like this man. You were always a good man of business, Jacob. Business! Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, benevolence were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Hear me, my time is nearly gone. I will, but don't be hard upon me. Don't be flowery, Jacob, pray. I am here tonight to warn you that you have yet a chance and hope of escaping my fate, Ebenezer. You're always a good friend to me, Jacob. Thank you. You will be haunted by 3 spirits. Is that the chance and hope you mentioned, Jacob? I think I'd rather not. Without their visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow night when the bell tolls 1. The second on the next night at the same hour. The third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased to vibrate. For your own sake, remember what has passed between us. The ghost walked backwards from him, and with every step it took, the window opened itself a little, so when the apparition reached it, it was wide open. Scrooge closed the window, and then examined the door by which the ghost had entered. It was double locked, and the bolts were undisturbed. Scrooge tried to say, but stopped at the first syllable, and went straight to bed without undressing, and he fell asleep on the instant. Scrooge awoke, and light flashed up in his room. Then the curtains of his bed were drawn aside by a strange figure, like a child, yet not so much like a child as like an old man, viewed through some supernatural medium. The face had not a wrinkle on it, and the tenderest bloom was on the skin. It held a branch of fresh green holly in its hand, and in singular contradiction to that wintry emblem had its dress, trimmed with summer flowers. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of its head there sprung a bright, clear jet of light, by which all this was visible. Are you the spirit, sir, whose coming was foretold to me? I am. Who and what are you? I am the ghost of Christmas past. Long past? No, your past. The things that you will see with me are shadows of the things that have been. They will have no consciousness of us. What brought you here? Your welfare. Rise and walk with me. He rose, but finding that the spirit made towards the window, Scrooge clasped its robe in supplication. I am mortal, and liable to fall. Bear but a touch of my hand, there, upon your heart, and you shall be upheld in more than this. They passed through the wall and stood in the busy thoroughfares of a city. It was made plain enough by the dressing of all the shops that here too it was Christmas time. The spirit stopped at a certain warehouse door and asked Scrooge if he knew the old gentleman sitting behind the high desk. Know him? Why, I apprenticed him. Why, that's old Fezziwig. Bless his heart, it's Fezziwig, alive again. Old Fezziwig laid down his pen and looked up at the clock, which pointed to the hour of 7. He rubbed his hands and laughed all over himself, from his shoes to his organ of benevolence, and called out in a comfortable, oily, rich, fat, jovial voice, "Oh, yo-ho there, Dick and Ebenezer!" And in that moment, a living and moving picture of Scrooge's former self, a young man, came briskly in, followed by his fellow prentice. Oh, Dick Wilkins, to be sure, my old fellow prentice, bless me, yes, there he is. He was very much attached to me, was Dick. Yo, my boys, no more work tonight. Christmas Eve, Dick. Christmas, Ebenezer. Let's have the shutters up before a man can say Jack Robinson. Clear away, my lads, and let's have lots of room here. Clear away? Why, there is nothing they wouldn't have cleared away or couldn't have cleared away with old Fezziwig looking on. It was done in a minute, and that warehouse was as snug and warm and dry and bright a ballroom as you would desire to see upon a winter's night. In came a fiddler with a music book, and he went up to that lofty desk, and he made an orchestra of it, and he tuned like 50 stomach aches. In came Mrs. Fezziwig, one vast, substantial smile, the 3 Miss Fezziwigs, beaming and lovable, and the 6 young followers, whose hearts they broke. In came all the young men and women employed in the business, and they all came anyhow and everyhow, and away they all danced. 20 couple at once. And then Fezziwig clapped his hands to stop the dance, and the fiddler plunged his hot face into a pot of port, especially provided for that purpose. And there were more dances, and there was cake. There was a great piece of cold roast and mince pies and plenty of beer. But the greatest effect of the evening came when the fiddler struck up Sir Roger de Coverley. Then old Fezziwig stood out to dance with Mrs. Fezziwig. Now, as for her, she was worthy to be his partner in every sense of the term. Advance, retire, turn your partner, bow and curtsy, corkscrew, thread the needle, and back again to your place. When the clock struck 11, the ball broke up. Mr. and Mrs. Fezziwig took their stations to shake hands with every person and wish him or her a Merry Christmas. A Merry Christmas. A small matter to make these silly folks so full of gratitude. Fezziwig has spent but 3 or 4 pounds of your mortal money. Is that so much that he deserves this praise? It isn't that, Spirit. He has the power to render us happy or unhappy. Say that his power lies in things so slight and insignificant that it is impossible to add and count them up. What then? The happiness he gives is quite as great as if it cost a fortune. What's the matter? Nothing particular. Something, I think. No, I should like to say a word or two to my clerk just now, that's all. My time grows short. This was not addressed to Scrooge or to anyone whom he could see, but it produced an immediate effect. For again, he saw himself. But now he was a bit older, a man in the prime of life. And he was not alone. He sat by the side of a fair young girl in a black dress, in whose eyes there were tears. It matters to you very little. Another idol has displaced me, and if it can comfort you as I would have tried to do, I have no just cause to grieve. What idol has displaced you? Golden one. You fear the world too much. I have seen your nobler aspirations fall off one by one until the master passion, gain, engrosses you. Have I not? What then, even if I have grown so much wiser, I am not changed towards you? Have I ever sought release from our engagement? In words, no. In what then? In a changed nature. In an altered spirit. If you were now free, would you choose a dowerless girl? or choosing her, do I not know that your repentance and regret would surely follow? I do. And with the love for him you once were, I release you with a full heart. Spirit, remove me from this place. I told you these were the shadows of the things that have been, that they are what they are. Do not blame me. Remove me. Take me back. Leave me. Haunt me no longer. Scrooge awoke. In his bedroom. There is no doubt about that. But the walls and the ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked like a perfect grove. Leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back a great light as if many little mirrors had been scattered there and heaped upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, great barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, and great bowls of punch. In easy state upon this couch there sat a giant, and he was glorious to see. Hey, come in, and know me better, man. I am the ghost of Christmas present. Look upon me. You've never seen the likes of me before. Oh. Touch my robe. Spirit, conduct me where you will. Last night I went forth on compulsion and learnt a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Scrooge grabbed onto his robe and held it fast. The room and its contents vanished instantly, and they stood in the city streets on a snowy Christmas morning. He and that spirit passed on invisible through the city, blessing everywhere they went, until they came to the house of Bob Cratchit. Just as they passed through the wall of the house, in that very moment, up rose Mrs. Cratchit. And she was dressed up but poorly in a twice-turned gown, brave in ribbons, which are cheap and make a goodly show for 6pence. Son Peter Cratchit plunged a fork into a saucepan of potatoes, getting the corners of his monstrous shirt collar up into his mouth. And just at that moment, two smaller Cratchits, boy and girl, came tearing in, screaming that outside the baker's they had smelt the goose and known it for their own. And while these two young Cratchits danced about the table, basking in luxurious thoughts of sage and onion, they exalted Peter Cratchit to the skies while he blew on that fire until the slow potatoes, bubbling up, knocked loudly at the saucepan lid to be let out and peeled. "There's father coming!" they cried everywhere at once, and in came their father, Bob Cratchit, with at least 3 feet of that comforter, exclusive of the fringe dangling below his waist, and Tiny Tim upon his shoulder. Now, as for Tiny Tim, he bore a little crutch and had his limbs supported by an iron frame. And when the two young Cratchits bore Tiny Tim off to the wash-house that he might hear the puddings singing in the copper, Mrs. Cratchit said, "How did Tiny Tim behave, Bob?" "As good as gold, and better. Somehow he gets thoughtful sitting by himself so much. He says the strangest things you ever heard. He told me he hoped people in the church saw him because he was a cripple, and it might be pleasant for them to remember on Christmas Day who made lame beggars walk and blind men see." And while Bob compounded a hot mixture in a jug with gin and lemons and put that on the hob to simmer, Peter and the two young Cratchits went to fetch the goose, with which they soon returned in high procession. Mrs. Cratchit made the gravy hissing hot. Peter mashed the potatoes with incredible vigor. Daughters Belinda and Martha sweetened up the applesauce. And Bob took Tiny Tim beside him in a tiny corner of the table. The two young Cratchits set chairs for everyone. The dishes were set on. And grace was said. There never was such a goose, eked out by applesauce and mashed potatoes. The youngest Cratchits in particular were steeped in sage and onions to the eyebrows. I could tell some people were a little hungry in the audience. We're sitting at the table with them. And then the pudding. Everybody know what Christmas pudding is? What is Christmas pudding?
Steamed pudding of dried fruit.
That's right. It's a very dense, rich, fruity cake, and often there's a liqueur on top or alcohol, and you light it on fire for effect and to burn the alcohol off, and it's really dense and really rich, really dark, really delicious. And that pudding slipped out of the copper, and then there's a layer of the white cloth. They peel off that white cloth, and the smell, like an eating house and a pastry cook's next door to each other with a laundress's next door to that. "Oh, a wonderful pudding!" cried Bob Cratchit. He regarded it as the greatest success achieved by Mrs. Cratchit since their marriage. Everybody had something to say about it. At last the dinner was all done, and while the chestnuts sputtered and crackled noisily on the fire, Bob proposed a toast. "A Merry Christmas to us all, my dears. God bless us," which all the family echoed. "God bless us, every one," said Tiny Tim. He sat very close to his father's side on his little stool. Bob took his little hand in his and proposed again. "To Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast." "The founder of the feast, indeed," cried Mrs. Cratchit. "I wish I had him here now. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I'd hope he'd have a good appetite for it." "My dear, the children, Christmas Day." "It should be Christmas Day when one drinks the health to such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows better than you do. But Christmas Day, the children." "I'll drink his health for your sake, not for his." "Long life to him, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year." Well, the mention of Scrooge's name cast a dark shadow on that party, which was not dispelled for a full 5 minutes, when they had a song from Tiny Tim. "There is nothing of high mark about this family. They were not handsome, they were not well dressed, their shoes were far from being waterproof, their clothes were scanty, but they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time. And as this scene vanished, Scrooge had his eye upon them, especially on Tiny Tim. It was a great surprise for Scrooge to suddenly hear a hearty laugh. It was an even greater surprise for him to recognize that laugh as his own nephew's, and to find himself in a bright, dry, gleaming room. There's nothing in the world so irresistibly contagious as laughter and good humor. When Scrooge's nephew laughed, Scrooge's niece by marriage and their assembled friends laughed as heartily as he. He said Christmas was a humbug, as I live. He believed it too. He is a comical old fellow. That's the truth. And he is not so pleasant. However, his offenses carry their own punishment. Who suffers by his ill whims, huh? Himself. After tea, they played a game called Yes and No. "Oh, here's a new game. Can we stay 1/2 hour, Spirit? Only one." You want to know how this game works? Besides you who was here the other day? How does Yes and No work? No? You know how that works, don't you? Yes and no.
You have to tell the truth.
You have to tell the truth. That's kind of hopefully a trusted fact. Yeah. So what do you ask?
Questions that to be answered yes or no.
Yes. So Scrooge's nephew was thinking of something, the rest had to figure out what it was, and you had to answer, and you had to ask questions that had a yes or no answer. What might you ask to figure out what he's thinking about?
Is it bigger than it was?
Yes. Yeah, that's the usual beginning.
Yeah.
Both are yes. Any others? Can it be eaten? It's a tricky one. Yeah. Yes, I guess so.
Are we playing the game right now? Are you thinking?
Are we not doing it? Am I thinking of something? I am thinking of something. You want to ask a question to?
Are we trying to figure it out? Are we actually?
Yeah, would you like to know? Anyway, somebody asked if he was thinking of an animal. And he said yes.
A wild animal?
A live animal, a wild animal, a savage animal, a disagreeable animal, and an animal that growled and grunted sometimes were yes to all those answers. And at last one of the dinner guests called out, I found it out. I know what it is, Fred. I know what it is. What is it? It's your Uncle Scrooge! It certainly is. Well, Uncle Scrooge had become so gay and light of heart that he too laughed. Funny, nephew, funny. The whole scene passed off in the breath of the last words spoken by his nephew. And he and the spirit were again upon their travels. Much they saw, and far they went, and many poor and struggling homes they visited, and always with a happy end. It was rich. Then suddenly the clock struck 12. Scrooge looked about him for the ghost and saw it no more. As the last stroke of 12 ceased to vibrate, he remembered the prediction of old Jacob Marley. Lifting up his eyes, he beheld a solemn phantom, draped and hooded and coming like a mist along the ground towards him. It was shrouded in a deep black garment which concealed its head, its face, and its form. Nothing of it was visible save one outstretched hand. Am I in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, ghost of the future? I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. But I am prepared to bear you company, and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me? Lead on, spirit. The night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit. The city seemed to spring up about them, and the spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Observing that the hand was pointed to them, Scrooge advanced to listen to their talk. No, I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead. Well, when did he die? Last night, I believe. Well, what was the matter with him? I thought he'd never die. God knows. Well, what has he done with his money? I haven't heard. He left it to his company, perhaps. He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know. Scrooge was surprised that the spirit should attach importance to conversation apparently so trivial. But then he and the spirit left this busy scene and went to an obscure part of the town. A low shop where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. Just as a charwoman with a heavy bundle slunk in, the laundry keeper entered too, and he was followed closely behind by the undertaker's man in faded black. Every person has a right to take care of themselves. He always did. Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Huh? Not a dead man. If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, the wicked old screw, why wasn't he natural in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had somebody to look after him when he was struck with death, instead of lying gasping out his last breath, alone by himself.
Oh yeah, it's the truest word that ever was spoke, huh? It's a judgment on him, yeah!
Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what is this? The scene changed, and now he almost touched a bare, uncurtained bed. A pale light fell straight upon that bed, and on it, unwatched, unwept, uncared for, was the body of this plundered, unknown man. Let me see some tenderness connected with the death, or this dark chamber spirit will be forever present to me. But the spirit conducted him to poor Bob Cratchit's house, the dwelling they had visited before. And they found the mother and the children seated round the fire. It was quiet, very quiet. The mother and the daughters were quietly engaged with needlework. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. And he took a child and set it in the midst of them. And then in came Bob Cratchit, and the two young Cratchits each sat upon his knees and laid a little cheek against his face. "You went to the gravesite, Robert?" said Mrs. Cratchit. "Yes, my dear. I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday. Tiny Tim, my little child, my little child." Spirit, something informs me that our parting moment is at hand. I know it, but I know not how. Tell me what man that was with the covered face, whom we saw lying dead. But the spirit conveyed him to a dismal, wretched, ruinous churchyard. Before I draw nearer to that gravestone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of the things that may be only? Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends to which, if persevered in, they must lead. But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me. Scrooge crept towards it, trembling as he went, and following that finger, read upon the stone of that neglected grave, "Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? No, spirit, no, spirit. I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I might have been before this intercourse. Why show me this, if I am past all hope? Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life." For the first time, the spirit's hand faltered. "I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." Holding up his hands in one last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Oh, best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, to make amends in. He was checked in his transports by the churches, ringing out the lustiest peals he had ever heard. Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist, no night. Clear, bright, stirring, golden day. What's today? Eh? What's today, my fine boy? Today? Why, Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello. Do you know the poulterers in the next street at the corner? I should hope I did. An intelligent boy, a remarkable boy. Do you know whether they've sold the prize turkey that was hanging there? Not the little prize turkey, but the big one. The one as big as me? Oh, what a delightful boy. It's a pleasure to talk to him. Yes, my buck. It's hanging there now. Is it? Go and buy it. Sure, mister. No, I am in earnest. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here that I may give them direction where to take it. Come back with that man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes, I'll give you half a crown. The boy was off like a shot. I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's. He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. Scrooge dressed himself in his best and at last got out onto the streets where people by this time were pouring forth. Walking with his hands behind him, he regarded everyone with a delighted smile. Good morning, ma'am. A Merry Christmas to you. A Merry Christmas to you. He could not share enough Christmas cheer. But in the afternoon, he turned his steps towards his nephew's house. He had to pass the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash and did it. Fred? Nephew? It's I, your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred? Let him in? Why, it is a mercy Fred didn't shake Scrooge's arm off. Scrooge felt at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. So did everyone when they came. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, if he could be there early then. He wanted to catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had his heart set upon. And he did it. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. Bob was a full 18 and a half minutes late. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come into his tank. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door. His comforter, too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he might overtake 9 o'clock. Then in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it, Scrooge growled, "What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day?" "I'm very sorry, sir. I'm behind my time." "Yes, I think you are. Step this way, if you please." "I'm very sorry, sir. It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "I tell you what, my friend, I'm not going to stand for this sort of thing any longer. And therefore, I'm about to raise your salary." "A Merry Christmas, Bob. A merrier Christmas than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family. We will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop, Bob. Make up the fires and buy a second coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." Scrooge was better than his word He did it all, and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was like a second father. He became as good a man and as good a friend as the good old city knew, or any other good old city in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but his own heart laughed, and it was quite enough for him. He had no further intercourse with spirits, and it was always said of him that he knew how to keep Christmas as well as any man alive. May that be truly said for all of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, every one.